career. We're really excited to bring this particular topic to you. When we talk about toxicity in our life, it doesn't have to be big toxic. Sometimes those little toxic leaks really have a big impact on your life. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here today. The agenda on our next slide goes through in terms of how we're going to spend our time together. We're going to give you just a little program overview. And again, what Women United does and how we contribute to our local community. We'll have Julia Toothacre, our wonderful speaker or keynote speaker for today. And then stay tuned at the end for upcoming events and our closing. We want to make sure you know about all the great events coming up for Women United. So with that, let's just talk about our LeadHERS committee. So I just want to thank the small but mighty team here that puts together this content for our Women United members. And so Melissa O'Hara, hi, I'm president of O'Hara Solutions Group. Sandy Perillo-Simmons, she's global head of data governance for AIG, joining us from London today. So thank you for fitting this into your travel schedule. Marianne Cruz, new member to the committee. We're so excited to have you as a CEO and business strategist of Masterful CEO. And of course, we couldn't do anything here at Women United without Lauren Pera, who has just done such an amazing job as our program manager and really helping bring this all together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, just go over some high-level stats about Women United.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So happy to be with you today for our LeadHERS series with Julia Toothacre. Just want to go over a couple things with Women United. I know we have new members often coming through, and some of you who have been members for a while, you know, we always have new data that's coming up throughout the years. So as many of you know, Women United is a global effort of over 70,000 women dedicated to creating a world of opportunity. Women United is engaged in over 165 communities across 6 countries. And Women United has raised $2 billion since 2002, so on the global level, supporting focus areas such as education, financial stability, and women's health. So, you know, each Women United group kind of focuses on a different issue. And as you know, ours is family financial stability here in the Hartford region. And our local Women United serves the greater Hartford area, focusing on programs that help women and families mobilize economically. All right, next slide, please. All right, so our local Women United focuses on 4 issues that matter most to members and what is most needed in the community. So women's empowerment, financial capability, asset building opportunities, and family sustaining employment. 2 key objectives for our local Women United are adults obtain and retain jobs that offer family sustaining wages and career advancement, and individuals and families increase their financial capability to achieve short and long-term. All right, next slide, thank you. And so for those of you who don't know, we did just release our 2023 ALICE report, which has a lot of interesting data coming out of 2021. So pandemic-related data on how ALICE households are being affected. So just to kind of give you all a sense of what those findings are. Financial hardship of Connecticut households continues to grow, which I'm sure you can imagine. The problem is a mismatch between wages and the cost of basics. So with inflation, we all know things are more expensive. That can be really hard for folks who are already working to make ends meet. One of the findings is that racial, age, and gender disparities persist. So seeing some of those differences and disparities getting even larger and getting greater with the disparity between income and sorry, everyone, people are joining and I'm trying to let them in. The disparities between, you know, what folks are making and what it costs to live. Another finding is pandemic-related enhancements to federal benefits have expired, increasing the strain. So that I'm sure you all have heard a bit about that in the news on how that is really those benefits that are, were in place to help folks, are really going to be taxing for people now. And of course, the rising cost of household essentials is putting a financial stability further out of reach. So, as I mentioned, the cost with inflation. All right. And so just to give a little bit of context about, telling you about what we're up to and then what we're seeing in the community. So Our Women United is
Oh,
positioned
yeah, I
to
did.
to help combat these disparities by pooling resources to fund programs that provide Alice families with the support that they need in this critical time. So to date, more than 2.2 million has been raised through the organization's signature fundraising events, Power the Purse, and Red, White, and Chocolate. So funds help ensure that participants in United Way supported programs work to identify financial goals, develop realistic budgets, reduce debt, build savings, increase income, and receive career coaching. So last year, more than 1,200 local adults enrolled in job training programs that improved their employment potential, and nearly 1,400 people participated in financial management programs to create and maintain budgets, increase savings, and reduce debt. So really just kind of want to highlight how, philanthropy and how organizations like United Way coming together to really work against the issues of, of poverty and of financial struggles that families have. We really work to fill the gaps that the government, doesn't fill. So it's really important for us to remember kind of the mission of why we're organizing together. And of course, to learn more, the report is accessible online. So you can visit alice.ctunitedway.org for more information. All right. And so now I will turn it over to career coach and strategist, Julie Toothacre, who will begin by telling you a little bit about herself.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here, and I love hearing everything that this organization is doing. That's really exciting for someone like me because I love seeing other organizations that are providing easier access to this type of information. So I'm so glad that I got to hear that. That was not something that I really knew coming into this. So today we are going to be talking about detoxifying your life and career. I want to give a couple of caveats before I go in and introduce myself. This can be a really hard topic for people. So I just want to set that as, it's okay to have some thoughts and some feelings around this. I'm going to be bringing up, I think, some tough topics for some people. One thing is that anything that is shared here, please keep it here. I know this is being recorded, but anybody that watches it, anybody that's participating, please don't go out and share, other people's information and things that we're talking about. Again, these are pretty sensitive topics here. Also, just in preparation, I have a couple of activities that we're going to do. So if you have a sheet of paper near you, or you want to open up like a document on your computer, I just want to prep you for that so that you can participate and be ready to go. So like Lauren said, my name's Julia Toothacre. I am a career coach and strategist. I've been doing this work for about 12 years now. Got my start in higher education, spent about 8 years there working in career development in career offices, and then shifted over to my own business about 5 years ago. So I own Ride the Tide Collective. I'm a solopreneur. So anything that you see that comes out from my company is me. I do pretty much everything for the company. And I like that. It's very personal. So anytime that I'm working with clients and doing things like this, you're working with me directly. I'm also a podcast host. I have a podcast by the name of my company, Ride the Tide Collective, and it's all career-related topics and interviews and things like that. So I highly encourage you to look that up if you are interested in that type of content, especially if you commute. It's always good for a commute. All right, so some of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to identify some of our top values. It's going to be one of our first activities, and it's one of my favorites, and we'll go into that in a little bit. We're going to talk about your realistic reality. So when it comes to toxicity, a lot of times we're not 100% sure what is the real side of the toxic situation and what maybe we are kind of conflating in our minds, or maybe we've read a situation wrong, something like that. So we're going to talk about the reality of our situations, our work, our life. We're gonna look at some definitions. And I will tell you, as I was putting this presentation together, I had not really looked up the definition of toxicity, and it's pretty intense. So we're gonna share that and talk about it. And I think that's really good to kind of set some groundwork. We're gonna clarify the difference between toxicity and burnout. Those two things are very closely related. We're going to touch on that. And then we're going to talk about action steps, because I think anytime we do something like this, there has to be action associated. We have to look forward to, okay, I just got all this information. Now what am I going to do with it? We're going to talk about that and hopefully give you some good action to then move forward. Okay, so first we're going to talk about values. I call this identity analysis. So in my coaching, this is kind of a piece of understanding your identity, looking at yourself and understanding who you are. We're going to look at core values. I do have a values freebie that's a little bit more detailed than the activity we're going to do today. I'm actually going to wait till the end to give you the link for that, because I don't want you to get caught up in trying to download it. You don't need to download it to do the activity. This is just going to be like a shortened version of that. But if you want the more extended version, I will give the link toward the end. But what I want to do is give you some prompts about values to get you to start thinking about what this could look like for you. So part of the reason that we're starting with values is because they become our filter for everything, right? They become our filter for all the decisions that we make within our career, within our life, all of that. This is an exercise that I have all of my clients do. It is an exercise I recommend to pretty much anyone at multiple stages of your career and life, because if you make any big changes, going over your values will help kind of take you back to ground zero and go, okay, this is where I'm at now. This is what I care about. And so now this is the filter and this is the lens that I need to use to make some decisions moving forward. So first, I want you to think about, what do you care most about right now? What is something that you find yourself going, this is something that is top of mind for me. This is something that I care about. This is something that it has to be a part of my work. It has to be a part of my life. I don't want to compromise on that. So I want you to think about that. What makes you excited? What do you get excited about? So when you think about your work and coming to work and, the last couple of months, what is something that you're like, man, this was really fun, or I really enjoy doing this type of work. I really enjoyed this type of relationship, this type of client. What really excites you? And think about that in your life as well. If you have different hobbies and things, what's really exciting you? And then what frustrates you? This is always an interesting one, because it's like, well, why do I have to understand what frustrates me? Well, you have to understand what frustrates you so that you don't do those things. You can also look at the opposite of that. So if you have something that frustrates you, then you might be seeking the opposite of that in a value. So think about those things that are really frustrating you. I don't know about you, but for me, it used to be traffic. I lived in Southern California for a long time, and I hated driving and I hated traffic. So one of my values was proximity to work. I had to be within a certain distance, not just distance, but actually time to get to and from work. That was a very high value for a long time. It's not a value anymore because I work from home, but you can see how those things shift. Oops. And the goal here is we want to essentially get to 3 to 5 values. I'm going to put a list up in just a second and give you some time to think about this. So don't think that you have to be doing it all right this second. But I want you to come up ultimately with 3 to 5. I think today, if you could come up with 1 or 2 in this exercise, I think that'll help give you a little bit of a baseline for what we're doing today. And those 1 to 2 values usually tend to be what I call deal breakers. So these are the values that, let's say you were to switch a job, you absolutely would have to have these things be a part of that. So again, for me, a deal breaker was commute. For a lot of people right now, flexibility in schedule is a deal breaker. And so understanding those things that you're like, I absolutely have to have this, or I don't want this, is really helpful. Okay, so this is a shortened, abbreviated list of values. These are the ones that I find to be the most common. I have them split into different areas. You do not have to identify your values this way. You're really looking collectively just for a couple of values that really stick out to you as something that you're like, yes, this is what I care about. This is the thing that I need. I've seen more recently, financial stability has been very high for most people. I've seen that more commonly this year than I have in previous years. And, we talked, Lauren mentioned, not the recession, the inflation and all of that. So we're seeing people's values shift a little bit right now due to things that are going on in the economy, in the world, and all of that. So I'd love to give you a couple of minutes to just read through the list, think through some of the questions that I asked. And if you are comfortable, I would love for you to put in the chat a couple of the values that you're like, yes, this is a value that I absolutely have. This is one of my deal breakers. And if somebody would like to share in a few minutes, I'll probably ask for that as well. But I'll give you a few minutes of silence to go through this, and then go ahead and share in the chat.
Julia, it's Melissa. I have a quick question for you while people are.
Sure.
You said your values right now. Can you talk about like how often should you look at these and how often do they change?
Yes, such a good question. So I usually recommend that people look at their values at least twice a year, unless you have something big that happens. So if there's some kind of big change that has happened, so like a life event, married, children, somebody passes, maybe an unexpected job opportunity, or you get let go, some big change like that, I always recommend reevaluating, because they will change with whatever is going on in your life. So a lot of assessments that we do in career, like personality and things like that, those really aren't going to change too much throughout your lifetime, but values is something that is always going to adjust as you grow and as life happens. All right. So we've got some coming through the chat. I love this. I love seeing what people value. I think it's really cool too when you get to see what other people value, because sometimes I've worked with people where they almost feel shame around valuing some of the things that they value. And so I think it's nice to see what other people are looking at, and what they care about as well. Melissa, I'm going to pick on you because you talked about rest. And I think that's so important. And not many people include that in their values. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means for you?
Absolutely. For the 30 plus years in my career, it was all about just getting things done, doing it, achieving, getting work done, getting promotion, making sure that the kids were cared for and not left at daycare, any of those things, right? And now I realize how much I didn't value this kind of reset, time to renew. I didn't value it. I literally didn't. To me, more was better. And getting squeezing every ounce of juice out of the hours in the day. And now it is completely different. I see how rest plays a role in performance in my relationships. And I didn't value that before, so I didn't make it a priority. And now I do value it, and it feels so much better.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a feeling that there are quite a few people that understand that feeling in the room today. I know that I do. I still struggle with accepting rest as an activity. It's like an active thing that I can do and put on the list, because I'm very much like you, the go, 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 achieving. But I'm so glad that you brought that up. Is there anybody else that wants to share maybe something that was surprising or that you didn't think would be of value at this point in your life? Okay. No
Hi,
pressure.
Elise. Oh, it's
Yeah,
Elise.
yeah. Go ahead, Elise.
I just wanted to say that I really loved the concept of time freedom. I don't think I've ever had time freedom before, or at least not as an adult. And I just love that concept, and one that I really want to embrace going forward.
Yes, I think time in a lot of different contexts has been coming up quite a bit. And I feel like the pandemic is really the catalyst for that. People understanding that they view time very different than they did before the pandemic. So yes, absolutely. All right. So like I said, I have a freebie that has more values on it, goes a little bit more in depth. I will share that link with you toward the end. But again, this is a really great activity to do at different points throughout the year and anytime that there is a big change. So I want you to kind of keep this in mind as we go through and we talk about the rest of the topics today. Okay, so now we're getting into that realistic reality. This is the what is true about your situation. And when we're talking about toxicity, we have to really learn, because this is a learned behavior, how to step back almost outside of ourselves sometimes and go, what is happening in this situation? So before we look at scenarios, we're going to look at these definitions because I think this is so important. So the definition of toxicity from Merriam-Webster, the quality, state, or relative to degree of being poisonous. Poisonous. I don't know about you, but when I read that, I was like, that's a very intense word. Like toxic is an intense word, but to hear the definition have poisonous in it, I was like, oh, I feel like maybe I'm not using this word appropriately in most contexts. So that was the first definition. The second was an extremely harsh, malicious, or harmful quality. And so the language behind the definition of toxicity is very intense. And I think that's why when we use that word, I want to make sure that we are using it appropriately, that we are applying it to a situation. A situation that's appropriate. I think some people will use that word when they're just uncomfortable with a situation and they will say that it's toxic. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a toxic situation. It means that you're uncomfortable. So if we look at, is it poisonous. If you think about that word now, anytime that you think about toxicity, poisonous, harsh, malicious, that's what creates an actual toxic environment. Okay, so I split toxicity into 4 areas: environment, people, situations, and you. And what we're going to do in this next section is we're going to go through these 4 areas. And I want you to be thinking about if you have toxicity in these areas. But I don't want you to just think about the negative, because I don't want this to just be like picking apart every negative thing in your life. It's not about that. But it's looking at the toxic side, but also think about the positive side. So if I'm giving some examples and you're like, that's not really an issue for me, that's good. Like, let's honor the positivity as well, because we have to have a balance there, right? So if we think about these situations, they're going to apply in work and in life. And I'm going to be talking about both, because as much as I know people try to separate these things, more often than not, they are going to impact each other. They're going to be connected, because if something is happening to you at work, you could potentially bring it into your home life. And if something is happening in your home life, you can potentially bring it over into work. So I just want to be aware. I want everybody to be aware of that. So first, we're going to talk about environments. Okay, so we have your work environment and we have your home environment. What's going on there? How are you feeling when you show up to work? Are you feeling good? Are you relaxed? Are you happy? Is there some anxiousness there? You know, what is going on in that environment that is either positive or negative? Same with the home environment. Everybody has different scenarios. I know at one point in our life, we had somebody living with us, and it actually created a not so great environment at home. It's the nicest way I can put that. And we realized very quickly that having somebody else live with us was not something that we wanted, and it didn't work well for us. And so for that period of time, I wouldn't say it was toxic. Now that I understand the definition, it was not poisonous, but it was a very uncomfortable situation. And so I want you to think about the environments that you're in. How are you feeling? How does your body feel when you show up to work, when you come home? If you work from home, what does it feel like to go into your office? What does it feel like to go upstairs? I don't know about you. I work from home, and sometimes coming into the office, my whole body deflates because I know how much work is ahead of me. So understanding your environment and how it's making you feel is something to point out, so that we understand where potential toxicity and burnout can grow. Next, I want you to think about people. This is one of the areas that I think this is where I find the most toxic conversations is around the people in our lives. So with clients, it's usually with a manager or a coworker, somebody that's connected to them at work, is not treating them well. And so it creates this hostile work environment. There's a lot of toxicity in the conversations and all of that. Same thing can happen at home. If there's something going on with somebody in your household, it can create that hostility. It can create that toxicity. I mentioned before, if you're getting hostile work environment and somebody's always coming at you at work, and then you come home, you might be a little bit more sensitive when you come home. So understanding where some of these things stem from, you can then, help yourself transition a little bit better from place to place. So one thing I want to say about work and people, specifically with management, is I have a lot of clients that come to me and they say, Julia, my manager hates me. They absolutely hate me. I can't work for this person. It's not good. It's not good. And I'm like, okay, tell me exactly what has happened. What has made you feel? What have they said to you? What is their behavior? And I will tell you, about 70% of the time, it's not really anything that serious. It's not anything that is truly toxic or poisonous. It is usually something that has been interpreted a certain way, or my client has already things running through them and they've now interpreted a communication or an interaction with their manager as negative when it really wasn't. Right. And so that's why we want to break some of this down to understand the reality of the scenario. And so similarly, if you're bringing some of your stress and frustration from one place to another, you've got to understand that, because now it's impacting in another place that you might not want it to impact. Okay. Situations. This one is hard because we never know what somebody is going through, but this is something that I want you personally to be aware of. I went through a season where I lost my parents within about 1.5 years of each other, and I had my son in the middle of that. So we had 3 major life events in a very short amount of time. And that really impacted my relationships. It impacted how I showed up to work. I was very stressed, new mom, lost my parents, so much stuff going on. And so I had to constantly take a step back and go, okay, you are stressed and this is not something that you can handle right now. And so I had to really understand that about my situation. So situations can vary depending on who you are and what you've got going on. But think about financial stress. That impacts our work. It impacts our life. If you're a caregiver in any capacity, that also impacts, how we move through the world, what our values are in that season of being a caregiver, our levels of stress. Side note, if you are a caregiver, please be in therapy. Just hard stop, be in therapy, because it's so hard to be a caregiver for people. And I'm not talking about parenting, although you could be in therapy for parenting, but when you have to take care of like an elderly person or somebody that's sick, definitely do that for yourself, because it's very hard. If you have some situations at home, maybe with your kids or your spouse, just something going on, that can impact how you show up. It can impact, you can end up having this kind of like effect, where it's like, okay, this is happening. That impacts how I showed up at work, how I spoke to my manager, how I spoke to a colleague, right? And these things can impact each other. And so being aware of that for yourself will help you just understand when and where to show up. Also, any type of medical, mental health diagnoses, things like that impacts how you show up. Those are hard things to go through. And so don't minimize that in your story and in your situation. Make sure that you're honoring that and you understand that for a period of time, it is likely going to change how you show up at home and at work. Also, for work situations, think about cultures that are already toxic. Unclear expectations is something that happens a lot, where you just have no idea what is expected of you, or there's unrealistic expectations. With all of the layoffs that are happening right now, there are a lot of unrealistic expectations being put on the people that are still there. And so understand that those are situations that are going to impact how you show up as well. And then I always hate having this conversation and talking about this, because I think that people don't want to think of themselves as the toxic situation in their life. But having worked with a lot of different clients, having, worked myself on my own mental health and all of that, sometimes we are our worst person. I don't know the scenarios that you're in, but I know that I can spin something in my head out of control very quickly. And I finally am at a point where I understand that I'm doing that. I understand where it comes from, and I can reel myself back in very quickly. But early in my career, I could not do that, not the way that I can now. And so there were a lot of situations I was in that I was like, you were the problem. You were absolutely the problem. And so I know that that's hard to come to terms with. But that's part of understanding the reality of the situation, understanding that maybe you did have something that impacted you and it resulted in you showing up in a way that you didn't want to show up, but that's what happened. So I think taking ownership of how we behave and the things that we do is so, so important. So I know that can be hard for some people, but it's the reality. We can't talk about it. I wouldn't be a good coach if I didn't call you out on making sure that you are looking at yourself and you're understanding your behavior and how you're showing up in different situations. Okay, so I want to do a little bit of a reflection, and I know you're looking at this and you're like, Julia, that's a lot of questions and we don't have a lot of time. Yes, I understand. You do not need to go through all of these. This slide deck will get sent to you so that you have these questions and you have these resources. But these are the questions that I want you to be asking yourself in these situations. Because when we're talking about toxicity, we need to understand the root. We need to understand where it's coming from in our life, but we also need to see the positive side. So if you see these questions here, there's kind of a, negative reflection and positive reflection, because we need to see where the good is and we need to understand where the root is of the toxicity. So I want to give you a few minutes to reflect. Again, maybe choose one area, reflect on that. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Again, I'd love for people to put something into the chat, maybe something that resonated with you through what I was saying, or something that just surprised you, or even a conflict with some of the values that you were talking about. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Also, feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have any, and I can answer those as well. All right. I'm going to bring everybody back. And Melissa, I might have to poke on you again because you keep bringing up such good things that I think are worth sharing for the group. But you talked about family. Can you talk about that a little bit more if you're comfortable?
Sure, I can give you an example. So my youngest child, Suzanne, has had severe anxiety issues. And while I want to be empathetic when, you're getting phone calls with someone who's hyperventilating over what I would consider, the judgment of me, a minuscule situation, like going into a social situation. I can't go in there. I don't know who's going to be there. And just getting those phone calls. And unfortunately, it got to the point where anytime I would get a text from her, the first thing I would be like is, oh crap, now what? And that didn't feel good. It didn't feel good as a mother that every time there was an outreach, a phone call, or a text, my first initial reaction was like, you're just going to suck me into a vortex and I don't want to go there. And so what I realized, back to Marianne's, like the boundaries part of it is when or how do I respond? So I didn't need to respond to every text within seconds and just kind of like almost add gasoline to the fire. But I also had to realize that they weren't doing that to set me off. Whether I got triggered or not was about me. It wasn't about them. And so when I think about the toxic people part of it, it's more around how do I insulate myself, whether I choose to get grabbed by, and with Thanksgiving coming up, I don't know for other people here, thinking about the people that they're going to be in a room with and be like, okay, I don't need to engage in politics with you. I can choose how to walk away, what conversations I want to have or which ones I don't. And so my relationship, when I changed myself, changed dramatically with Suzanne because I now chose how I wanted to respond. And part of the toxicity was in my reaction, not just in how they were showing up with me.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's such a perfect example of you had a scenario with somebody externally, but there was also that internal piece too that you had to recognize. And I think that that's exactly what I'm hoping for, for those that are going through this, is that you see what's happening and you recognize your part in it, and you recognize that taking control of what you can control, right? So you can control your reactions. You can control how you show up. You can, for the most part, control boundaries and things like that. I don't think we talk about boundaries enough, especially in a work context. It's okay to say, hey, I don't want to have this conversation, but if you have a question about work, I'm happy to help you. Right? Like it's okay to say those things. And I think, at least for me coming up, in the workforce, it felt very uncomfortable to say those things, but that was my issue. That wasn't, somebody else's issue. So I so appreciate that, Melissa. Thank you. Is there anybody else that feels comfortable sharing anything that came up for them through this exercise? No pressure. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I also have to give a shout out to Julia Brinson because we have the same name. And it is so rare that I see another Julia. Also, I know Julie DeLuca is on this call too, but Julia specifically, I don't see a lot. And so I just have to say, hey, we have the same name, and that's awesome.
Hey girl, and that's my grandmother's name too, so I get it.
It was my grandmother's name as well.
We are best friends now. Okay, we'll talk about it later.
Actually, a Julia, my future daughter-in-law's a Julia as well.
What?
Oh my God, we're a throuple now. We're all best friends. We're all best friends.
Gosh. When you find people that have your name, it's so nice. Okay, let's quickly talk about toxicity versus burnout. I'm going to give you another definition to just help ground us in the reality of what these words mean. Burnout is the exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, which is usually where we see it, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. Okay, so we can see where if you are in those toxic environments for a long time, it's going to lead to burnout. So these terms should never be used interchangeably, right? It's toxicity, and those situations will lead you into a state of burnout if you don't manage them, if you don't work it out. So it's really about cause and effect between these two. So that's one of the things that I wanted to point out for everybody, so that you understand that the longer that you are in a toxic situation, whether that is at home, at work, all of that, it potentially leads to a state of burnout. If you feel like you are in burnout, therapy is always wonderful, but there is also a book called Burnout, and it is absolutely one of the best books I have read in a very, very long time. So if you just search burnout book in Google, it's one of the top things that comes up. So I highly recommend that book if this is something that you are dealing with. Julie says it's a great book. They have such wonderful strategies for how to deal with burnout. So if therapy isn't in the cards for you, then definitely get that book to help manage that. All right, I want to get into action so that we have some time for questions and things like that. But this is a lot of information to take in, right? And I moved pretty quickly because we have a short amount of time. But in that, what I want you to do moving forward, especially if some of this was kind of hard to hear, or you hadn't really thought about, people and your environment and situations in this way, take some time to reflect, continue reflecting, continue looking at your world. Once you start this process of really uncovering, like, oh, I see now this relationship doesn't feel good. This interaction is making me uncomfortable. What is it? What's going on? You start to get into, okay, now I see my reaction is this, and I understand why I'm uncomfortable. And you really can pinpoint where toxicity might rise up. If it hasn't completely gotten to that poisonous state yet, you can see where it could get there if certain patterns continue. So keep reflecting. This will take time to kind of get through. One of the things I always recommend when we're dealing with toxic environments and situations and toxicity in general is having some kind of self-care routine. So incorporating any kind of reflective exercises. So that could be journaling. It could be speaking to a trusted friend, in your network, or family member, a therapist, something like that. And then putting these self-care activities into your routine. And what I would love to do, because I know that sometimes self-care is a little ominous for people. I know I struggled with self-care for a long time. If you have some good self-care practices that you've been doing recently, if you could drop those in the chat, I think that would be really helpful for people to hear and see, like, what other people are doing for self-care. Because I know for me, I take baths, which I think sounds really, like, obviously that's a self-care thing, but I never used to do that. So it's a big deal that I do that now. And then I listen to music. I use music as a transition for me to go from thing to thing. And so it's something that's really helped me relax and kind of tone down and all of that. So if you have some of those, I'd really appreciate you putting those in the chat for everybody. And then finally, some of you might be surprised by this, but sometimes you have to make a big change. So if you are in a really toxic, poisonous environment or situation, sometimes a big change is needed. Most of my clients, because I'm a career coach, they want to switch positions, they want to switch companies or teams or something like that. I think that that's great. Don't do this, immediately. So don't go into your job tomorrow and be like, Julia said that I needed to make a big change, so I'm going to quit my job today. Don't do that, please. I don't want to be the cause of financial issues. But you have to think about, can I sustain what's going on here? Can I make the changes necessary to de-escalate this potentially toxic scenario? And if I can't, then what is the next step that I can take, and what does that look like? So big changes are good to get us out of situations, but you also have to be ready for that. And certain changes take time. They take finances in some cases. So just be ready to do that work, but also don't count it out as something to do. So those are the 3 actions that I would consider after this presentation. And there are some really wonderful self-care things in the chat. So make sure that you read through those. And Jennifer, yes, I believe there is going to be a replay if I recall. Melissa, am I right on that?
There will be it'll be sent out a link with the replay. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Excellent.
So there,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. No problem. All right. I think I have a couple of minutes for Q&A. If anybody has any specific questions about what we talked about today or any other career things, I'd be happy to answer those questions. Yes, Dion.
Hi there, Julie. Thank you so much for this great presentation. It's a lot to think about, but it gives a good, clear method going forward. My question is, when you're reflecting, like particularly environments, like what environment's been good and what environment's been bad, if you can't change the environment, do you just say, I have to remove myself? Or do you try to think of things that you can bring into the environment to make it better?
Yeah, so I would start with how can you change what you can control. So, I mentioned maybe you walk into work and you feel something in your chest that kind of like, ugh, like I don't feel good here. What's going on? You have to dig into what that feeling is, right? So why are you feeling that? Is it a person? Is it a situation? Is it the whole thing? Because if it's the whole thing, then you might want to consider maybe we need to move on from this place. Maybe we need to go somewhere else. So that's one of those big changes that might need to be made. But I will always advocate for trying to reflect and make those changes within yourself first. And sometimes it's changing up your schedule or changing up your routine in that environment so that it doesn't become monotonous as well. Great question.
And Julia, we have one more in the chat before we wrap up and close.
Okay. Jocelyn said, what if there is something completely out of your control? Is there a starting point? So when it's something completely out of your control, let's say like a work situation, like the company's making choices that you're just like, this is not what I want. So sometimes you have to put that into context that you are not the one making those choices, but you have to understand how it could potentially impact you. So I think sometimes, how your manager treats you, like you can't control your manager, but you can look at their situation. You can look at their context, their pressure, all of that. It doesn't negate them being rude or mean to you. I don't advocate for that at all. But if you at least understand maybe some of the pressure that they have, then it changes your cycle of thinking toward them. Having said that, if somebody is being like rude to you, verbally abusive, all of that, you got to go straight to HR. You have to report those things. That's not okay. If it's just being uncomfortable, that's something a little bit different. But definitely put things into context. And then also, if you're having a reaction to it, ask why you're having a reaction. Like, is it a warranted reaction? Is it something that maybe you experienced somewhere else? And you're just having, this memory of something else that happened in another position and it's bringing things up. So figure out if it's you or if it's the actual situation. Good question. Okay. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, any additional questions, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I am always on LinkedIn. I respond to messages there as well. So if you have any additional questions from this, I'm happy to answer that. And then I will also put my values guide into the chat for everyone. But thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. I hope that we got some good reflection, some good activities out of it.
Thank you, Julia.
I really appreciate how you had us basically go through and identify our core values and also explain to us the importance of self-care, but also defining and clarifying what toxicity is, which I feel was really important. So thank you. And I'm going to ask you to stay on as I share some additional information regarding events that are coming up and volunteer opportunities. So the first one is the annual Red, White, and Chocolate event, which is going to take place on Thursday, February 8th at the Yard Goats Stadium in the YG Club. We're excited to bring to you our reimagined signature event, complete with restaurants providing their best of foods for tasting, in addition to the wine and chocolate vendors that we all love. And we'll top off the event with our fan favorite Red, White, and Chocolate basket drawing. So tickets are available. Simply visit unitedwayinc.org to purchase your ticket. And now we'll talk about some volunteer opportunities. So I don't know about you, but I love reading. So imagine being able to gift that to the next generation of readers. We invite you to become one of the United Way's Readers Volunteers, which is basically providing one-on-one reading support to kindergartners to third grade students across the region. Our 2023 and 24 program actually started. It runs through November through May. As a volunteer, you'll be paired with a student at a local elementary school for weekly reading sessions. And the great part is that you get to select from doing this either in person or as an online session. So learn more by visiting unitedwayinc.org/readers. And the next one. And another opportunity is being part of VITA, which is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. So if you're experienced or enjoying preparing taxes, please know that there's a volunteer opportunity for you. The United Way of Central and Northeastern Connecticut, in partnership with the Village for Family and Children, are seeking volunteer income tax assistance for this upcoming tax season. So as a volunteer, you actually receive free IRS certifications, and you're given the tools to assist local adults and families with household incomes of up to $64,000. Claim every tax credit and refund that they've earned. So oftentimes tax returns are the largest checks that these families receive each year, and it helps them get ahead financially, allowing them to pay down debt and work towards saving for their future. And if, let's say, tax preparation is not your forte, then there's a variety of other roles, including greeting and translators, which is available. So if you're seeking to become more engaged with us, this is a great opportunity to get close to Women United's work in creating opportunities for families to achieve financial stability. You can learn more by visiting unitedwayinc.org/volunteer. We completely thank you. Next slide, please. We thank you for joining us for this session. Thank you, Julia, for presenting, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming events or even as a volunteer.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.